Please comment where you are watching in the world. Please become a channel member to support us. Story 1. I went on 2 dates with a guy, 24, we will call N. I am 20 female. He was an all-around nice guy, funny, and was very kind to me. Until Christmas Day, he decided to up and leave me because his mother said I was too young. A claim I found pretty ridiculous considering an only 3.5-year age difference. I kinda gave up and told him if he felt it was the right thing to do, then I would understand. Later on Christmas Day, he texted me apologizing profusely, saying he made a mistake. I told him if he wanted to see me again, he'd have to kiss a lot of ass, as the whole ordeal, and as well as it being on Christmas, was fairly upsetting. As a first step, he sent a lovely bouquet to my house the day after Christmas. That night, he had a co-worker coming over to help with a new program they were implementing at his job. I didn't think anything of it. The next morning, he tells me he slept with her. I practically laughed at him, and we proceeded to fight all day until I just eventually blocked him. The entire situation and dating him was shitty. From first text to last, it was probably around 3 weeks. I was upset for a while, then got over it. So now over a month later, he unexpectedly comes back into my life, but not in a way I'd ever had expected. I was in my room doing homework, and someone rings our doorbell. My dad comes in and says, "We have a problem." I asked him what he meant. He tells me someone is at the door saying I had an affair with their husband. I asked who was the man. He told me it was N. I was confused because my high school boyfriend has the same name, and I told him the only man I've slept with who has that name is the boyfriend from high school. I go to my front door and this woman is there asking if I know N, and I say yes I do. She introduces herself as his wife, much to my shock. We begin talking, and she's asking lots of questions. She tells me they've been together for 7 years and married for 4, with 2 kids. I answer all her questions honestly. I had literally nothing to gain from lying about his situation, as it was shitty for me, and I feel bad for this woman who's been cheated on. Even though she casually mentioned she had cheated on him before as well. She ends up calling in while we're talking to ask him questions, and while she's talking to him, she flips things I had told her. I was confused and just politely corrected her, thinking nothing of it. Then something changes. She asks me if I want to know what he told his best friends about me. I said sure. He had sent screenshots of our texts and pictures of me to them, called me a salamander of all things. I just laughed at it, and she did too, saying she didn't know what a salamander was. Continuing to ask questions, I answer them all to the best of my memory. She asks very specific things like, did he ever call you sexy, pretty, or beautiful? And I said I'm sure he did, but I couldn't tell you exactly when. Then she starts to put her things away and goes, "Well, I would be more careful who you meet on Tinder." I asked what she meant. She goes, "Well, I wouldn't have been as stupid as you." I asked how the hell I was supposed to know he was married and had kids. There was zero indication of that. She stands up and says she's glad she knows what I look like and it's meaningless. I turn to her and say, "Fuck you bitch," and shut my door. This quite literally was the craziest thing that ever happened to me. I still cannot wrap my head around how I am to be blamed for going out with a man I had no idea was married or had kids, and how I was supposed to know that. Not only that, but also she rationalized her husband cheating on her by saying I was unattractive. Some people, man. Story 2. So some civil servant of sorts working for a senator invited me for drinks. I Ubered from Arlington to the bar. It was closed. He was late. He told me to stay put. It was my first time in Shaw, and it was misting. I said nah, and walked to the nearest human-filled bar. He met me there. He spoke effeminately. He addressed this proudly, as he mansplained literally anything he could to me, a yike. I mean, understand the mind of women so well, like I literally took a class on female psychology, so I probably understand women even more than you do. Oh my God. Kept painting himself as a feminist, but just kept saying all these reductionist things and pointing out stereotypes about women in STEM me. He told me a graphic, horrifying first-person narrative of how his father coaxed him into existence, test tube baby, and how they mechanically separate sperm, because as a STEM person I certainly want to hear about centrifugal force, right? Explained his mental health and history with prescriptions in graphic detail. Just so much oversharing. Then expected me to pay the bill because, feminism. Even claimed it was the fair thing to do because I make more money than him. I didn't share my financials. I said I Ubered here, and you invited me, so no. He inched that $38 check towards me a few times before eventually mumbling about how the Uber round trip is probably even. Admittedly, I said yes to the date because I was rebounding a breakup, This was my first dating app date ever. He invited me back to his place claiming, and I quote, to be a totally different person in bed, a maybe little too freaky. So after drinking half a marred pitcher, I humored it. He was good looking, and maybe would talk less. Hooked up for maybe 5 minutes. Found him immensely boring as he just laid there. So I said I wanted to stop, no rides available. So we went to sleep. I woke up as early as possible and left. Pretty annoyed, I swore off tequila with strangers and dating men in politics, and have held firm to this ever since. He asked when we would go out again. I said never. He said, cool, why? I said just looking for something different. He asked what it was, why, but I answered, I like my men a little rougher around the edges. He proceeded to spew shit about how real women weren't supposed to like patriarchal stereotypes, and asked if I decided to end things, before or after you took advantage of me. You invited me to the sex, sir? And accused me of assault. I apologized for hurting his feelings and told him that regrettable consensual sex is not the same thing as assault, and the only person who is responsible for his bodily autonomy is him. This enraged him further. He then spoke on behalf of sexual assault survivors everywhere. I told him I was a survivor and found his whole gag offensive. He apologized, retreated, and suggested we should still be friends. A pupa of a man. Story 3. Story 1. Paper Prince, the Carrot and the Chatterbox. Ethiopian dinner date in Adams Morgan. Attractive man, great on paper, very much each other's type. On paper. The guy is like a malfunctioning chatterbox. He didn't even stop for air. Just talked about himself non-stop. At some point, I dropped a tiny carrot and it fell into my shirt. It nestled itself between my breasts. I wanted to get the carrot out, but not in front of him. I wanted to go to the bathroom and take it out, but I didn't want the carrot to fall out in front of him and others. And also he wouldn't shut up at all. He kept talking, and I wasn't even listening. I was just thinking about the carrot. I tried to find a way to sneak a glance to see if it's snug enough to survive me walking. I couldn't see anything unless I just pulled my shirt forward and stared down it. In which case, this would be a date out of a comedy sketch. I kept doing the math in my head of where it was most likely to be, how big it was, how much it weighed, what its fate would have been if I had worn a different bra. Ugh. The guy just talked throughout the entire dinner, except when he chewed. The carrot survived the whole walk to my car. Story 2. The mom resenting incel who claimed to be a former Senate staffer. This is from social media, not a dating app, and I noped out of this one before I ever met him. However, he gets a dishonorable mention because he's weird, and also because he's unlikely to read this and freak me out by popping up. This guy, we'll call him Ted, reached out to me based on something I wrote about a former senator. He said he used to work for this former senator, and that's how he found my profile. Neat, I'm down to bond over obscure interests. Maybe we'll be alike in other ways, or have other things in common. Monkey plays foreboding organ music. He frequently spoke of his work in the Senate, the senator's personality, how he was the senator's right-hand man for a long time. Quips, stories, fun memories. Good times. More on that later. He hates his mom, whom he exclusively refers to as his overbearing mother, anytime he mentions her, and he mentions her a lot. The more he talked about her, the more she grew on me, and I felt bad for her for having this gross asshole for a son. Her being overbearing was just her trying to help him solve his incessant miseries in any way, or improve his life in any way. No, it's because she's overbearing. And also the reason he's single is because he's an atheist and doesn't drink. Other people only are able to find partners through religion and alcohol. But also, he's only single because he's short. It has nothing to do with his unbearable personality. When I found his blog where he keeps a calendar of how long it's been since he has been touched by a woman, I was so disgusted. When he started blogging about me because I told him he needs to stop being so fucking whiny, I told him to stop blogging about me. He wouldn't. I told him not to contact me again. Some time passed, and I got a message. Oh, it's a nice woman who wants to be my friend, and happens to be his friend. I knew it was him, but I pretended that I was none the wiser. She tried to get close to me, and I played along to see what he's trying to do. She tried to get me to meet up with her. Creepy. She asked me if I saw Ted's recent blog post about me. Well, this was my moment. I told her that I got a lawyer, and we're preparing a lawsuit based on his blog posts, and that my lawyer keeps records of everything he posts, so I don't waste my time on it. I said the lawyer told me the more he posts, the higher my payout will be. Guess who never contacted me again? It turns out he lied about being the senator's right-hand man and longtime staffer. He was a fucking intern for several months. Story 6. Buddy of mine wanted to get in the game, but is super cheap, so he was using plenty of fish, mistake 1. Connects with a chick who seemed down to clown, so he, mistake 2, invited her to his house. She immediately is upset that he doesn't have Tito's vodka, and that's the only thing she drinks. So she insists they go to the liquor store and get some. Now my buddy is 50-50 that he's going to get robbed, but the other 50% is a good chance of getting laid. So he compromises by telling her to drive and leaves his wallet behind. They get into her car, and there's no seat in the passenger side. She says she has a huge dog, so she took the seat out and just sit in the back. And they head off to the liquor store. During the drive, he comes to the understanding that this woman is drunk. He's still holding out for the sex possibility, though they get to the liquor store, and it's too late, closed. The chick says, I know a store they're open late, but the liquor stores are all state stores, they all have the same hours. She insists she knows a place, and he's captive in the back seat. She gets on the interstate, and a while goes by in silence, and he eventually asked, where are we going? And she screams in terror. She'd forgotten he was in the back seat. She tells him they're going to the liquor store in a city 30 minutes away. Now he's almost given up on the failing hope of getting some strange, and just wants to live. Asks if they can just go home, and she screams again. Forgot he was in the car again. So he tried to keep a full conversation, going to keep her awake and aware of him, and they eventually get to the destination magic open liquor store. It was closed. She insists it's open and goes to the door and starts pounding on it. Now comes the peanut gallery. Some Mexican guys are sitting in a truck drinking beers and yell at her, that's closed. You want a beer? And she starts yelling racial slurs at them, and not even the right ones for Mexicans. Now 3 Mexicans and a drunk/high/bipolar chick are trading profanities. And my buddy finally reached sex chance equals 0% point and just walked away. Turned around the corner and sat down at a bus stop and called me. It's like 1 a.m. on a work night, and I see the call and like, this can't be good. So I drive to get him. He tells me this whole long story that I honestly can't remember half of. It was much worse. Then we drank at his place until dawn and called in sick to work. On top of this story, here is another. Not a date, but rather a girl I was hooking up with at a party. And it's kinda long, but I just think the whole thing was so weird it's worth sharing. We were in her kitchen and we begin to make out, and suddenly she starts talking about how her best friend is totally in love with her. But she keeps kissing me while saying so. Then she elaborates by saying, yeah, my best friend is outside in the party, and I'm like, whoa. Well, should we stop? She goes, no. And I'm kinda uncomfortable anyways, because I've been the best friend, and I kinda wanna stop. She goes, no, it's totally fine, and then keeps going on about it. Lick really going into detail, and tells me the whole story about how she liked him, but then she didn't, and I'm like, okay. And before I can decide what to do, the best friend walks into the kitchen. He goes, I'm sorry, and then walks out. Normal, uncomfortable situation, right? Well, this happens at least 3 times. Like, he keeps walking in and going, sorry, dude is clearly drunk at this point. So the 3rd time I'm like, nah dude, you guys clearly need to talk. I'll just be outside, you figure out stuff. And the girl holds my hand and makes me stay, but then starts talking to him, and like, she wants me to be a 3rd neutral party or something. She begins to tell him that she didn't like when he did so, and she asks me, what do you think, while holding my arm tightly and not letting me go. I said fuck it, and just end up playing along and actively listening to them and trying to help them. I'm a teacher, so I guess I'm good at that. Long story short, I managed to get out of that situation eventually. We go outside, and a few hours later people start leaving, so I go back to her apartment to grab my stuff. Of course, she comes back with me, and now we're all alone in the apartment. We go back to the kitchen and things start getting hot again, when suddenly we hear a knock on the door. And guess whose voice we hear outside? Yeah, of course, her best friend. So I'm like, okay, yeah, no, that's it, bye. And as I'm about to leave, she stomps her feet on top of the couch, putting her leg between me and the door, and asks me, so what are we? And I'm like, nothing. We just kissed, and listen, I'm sorry, I just went through a breakup, so I'm not really looking for anything more than that right now. I'm sorry if that disappoints you. And that was true, but also I didn't want to get into that whole mess at all. She goes, but can we still mess around some more? And before I can say anything, the best friend knocks again. So we open the door and he is there, and then he says sorry again, and I say, chill, I'm leaving anyways. And before I can go down the stairs, the girl calls me up and goes, my friend is too drunk. Can you make sure he gets home safe? And since I can't for the life of me say no to that, I end up in a cab with him 5 minutes later. During the trip, he starts telling me how much he loves her, but that she hurt him, and so on and so on. And I can totally understand the guy because, again, I've been in his position, but at this point I just want to get home and forget about the whole mess. But I have to make sure he gets home safe, so we stop in front of his house. And as he is about to leave, he turns around and says, "Please take good care of her, she is happier with you." He gets off the car and walks off into the night. A month goes by, and I see both the girl and her best friend walking down the street holding hands as a couple. Story 5. Well, it wasn't so much that she wanted to do what I now know as the daddy/little girl game, and that she actually literally identified as a 4-year-old, age play I think they call it, or that she was clearly still obsessed with her ex, or that after all this coming out on the second date, she proceeded to divulge that she had been raped many, many times. In graphic detail. It was so excessive that there's no way it was true, but when someone tells you that kind of thing, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. We ended up back at some relative's house, and just as I was about to bounce, I realized she was already really drunk, despite only having a couple of drinks. She was a pretty tiny girl though, and then she began to talk about Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. No, it wasn't any of the previously mentioned things. It was Sweeney Todd that led me through one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. Apparently it was the greatest play ever penned, blubbered out in a grand drunken dissertation that probably couldn't be rivaled by even the greatest booze artists of our time. I admit, I was captivated in some morbid way. I stayed and sipped on my drinks as she went further down a rabbit hole that, as it existed within her, had no bottom. It was like watching someone who wrote their thesis on the thing, but was promptly failed vent about the injustice of it all. And I imagined she would have failed because she handed the thesis into a technical writing class while drunk. This is how discordant and obtuse it all was. By my guess, the only type of person still willing to listen to what was becoming more obviously a compulsion evolved far beyond impulse were strangers. The other people present had expressions like it was happening for the 1000th time, and they were powerless to stop it. And I was powerless to look away. Such a passionate, fervent, elaborate, and frenzied car crash. Then she started singing. And did she ever sing? She fell over regularly, and her words were so slurred, and her physical movement so slothful and blurred, that I knew I was in for a real show. She did the whole play. From beginning to end, every part, each character with their own voice. She was mostly naked by the time it ended. I sat there and cheered her on, and tried to stop her drinking, and stoked the fire pit in the backyard of this stranger's house. She didn't miss a beat, a line, a gesture. Even when I went to the can, the neighbors hollered and the dogs barked, and I was beginning to wonder if I wasn't dreaming or something. I had never before nor since seen someone so in love with a piece of art as this crazy little French girl was. I was almost envious that I didn't feel that way about something. When she finally wrapped up and I told her to take a bow, she toppled over doing just that and proceeded to crawl over to me in my chair and try to initiate a blowjob. I laughed, picked her up, carried her in the house, and dumped her on the couch. Didn't even bother saying goodbye. I knew she wouldn't remember it anyway. I walked back to my truck laughing and contemplating the sheer absurdity of humanity, knowing I'd never see anything like that again. Wherever you are, Michaela, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you found your daddy, and life's a little smoother for you. But it probably isn't. Blessed be the mad ones. On top of this story, here is another to add. We matched, he said I was cute, and asked how small I am. I gave him my height/weight, and he replied with something like, "That's so hot." He then asked who I lived with, and learned I live alone. He said he had roommates, and wanted to come over to my apartment. I told him that I would only meet him in a public place. If that went well, I might invite him over, but considering that my size and that the city's pretty gritty for an itty-bitty pretty boy, I never invited people I hadn't met to my home. I thought he was cool. He sent flirty texts for about a week before I suggested we meet at a coffee shop at noon on Friday. He asked me to name the location. I did, but he said he couldn't get there on his lunch break. I said, since you are the one with time and location restraints at that time of day, why don't you pick the cafe? He said he wanted to meet at my apartment. I told him no, and asked if he'd pick a coffee shop. I think he joked about meeting at my place for the third time. I named a coffee shop and said that I'd meet him there at noon, if I got confirmation. This was around 10 a.m. on that Friday. I hadn't heard back from him by 11, and realized that I didn't want to meet this guy. I have to remember that because I'm openly trans on my dating profile, people may target me for assault. The first thing this guy did was confirm that he's large enough to overpower me. He then asked to meet me at my home, where I live alone. Even after I was very clear that I would only meet him in a public place, he kept joking that I should invite him to my apartment. He could have been a dumb, horny guy, but he also could have been someone targeting me for assault. I went home and picked up a work gig. I was out of cellular service for an hour and had a lot of messages from him when I returned. He said that the app wouldn't let him text me all morning, and he was sorry, but still wanted to meet at my apartment. After all that, he still refused to meet me in a public place. It freaked me the fuck out. I told him that I didn't want to meet him anymore and deleted the app. Story 6. Buddy of mine wanted to get in the game, but is super cheap, so he was using plenty of fish, mistake 1. Connects with a chick who seemed down to clown, so he, mistake 2, invited her to his house. She immediately is upset that he doesn't have Tito's vodka, and that's the only thing she drinks. So she insists they go to the liquor store and get some. Now my buddy is 50-50 that he's going to get robbed, but the other 50% is a good chance of getting laid. So he compromises by telling her to drive and leaves his wallet behind. They get into her car, and there's no seat in the passenger side. She says she has a huge dog, so she took the seat out and just sit in the back. And they head off to the liquor store. During the drive, he comes to the understanding that this woman is drunk. He's still holding out for the sex possibility, though they get to the liquor store, and it's too late, closed. The chick says, I know a store they're open late, but the liquor stores are all state stores, they all have the same hours. She insists she knows a place, and he's captive in the back seat. She gets on the interstate, and a while goes by in silence, and he eventually asked, where are we going? And she screams in terror. She'd forgotten he was in the back seat. She tells him they're going to the liquor store in a city 30 minutes away. Now he's almost given up on the failing hope of getting some strange, and just wants to live. Asks if they can just go home, and she screams again. Forgot he was in the car again. So he tried to keep a full conversation, going to keep her awake and aware of him, and they eventually get to the destination magic open liquor store. It was closed. She insists it's open and goes to the door and starts pounding on it. Now comes the peanut gallery. Some Mexican guys are sitting in a truck drinking beers and yell at her, that's closed. You want a beer? And she starts yelling racial slurs at them, and not even the right ones for Mexicans. Now 3 Mexicans and a drunk/high/bipolar chick are trading profanities. And my buddy finally reached sex chance equals 0% point and just walked away. Turned around the corner and sat down at a bus stop and called me. It's like 1 a.m. on a work night, and I see the call and like, this can't be good. So I drive to get him. He tells me this whole long story that I honestly can't remember half of. It was much worse. Then we drank at his place until dawn and called in sick to work. On top of this story, here is another. Not a date, but rather a girl I was hooking up with at a party. And it's kinda long, but I just think the whole thing was so weird it's worth sharing. We were in her kitchen and we begin to make out, and suddenly she starts talking about how her best friend is totally in love with her. But she keeps kissing me while saying so. Then she elaborates by saying, yeah, my best friend is outside in the party, and I'm like, whoa. Well, should we stop? She goes, no. And I'm kinda uncomfortable anyways, because I've been the best friend, and I kinda wanna stop. She goes, no, it's totally fine, and then keeps going on about it. Lick really going into detail, and tells me the whole story about how she liked him, but then she didn't, and I'm like, okay. And before I can decide what to do, the best friend walks into the kitchen. He goes, I'm sorry, and then walks out. Normal, uncomfortable situation, right? Well, this happens at least 3 times. Like, he keeps walking in and going, sorry, dude is clearly drunk at this point. So the 3rd time I'm like, nah dude, you guys clearly need to talk. I'll just be outside, you figure out stuff. And the girl holds my hand and makes me stay, but then starts talking to him and like, she wants me to be a 3rd neutral party or something. She begins to tell him that she didn't like when he did so, and she asks me, what do you think, while holding my arm tightly and not letting me go. I said fuck it and just end up playing along and actively listening to them and trying to help them. I'm a teacher, so I guess I'm good at that. Long story short, I managed to get out of that situation eventually. We go outside, and a few hours later people start leaving, so I go back to her apartment to grab my stuff. Of course, she comes back with me, and now we're all alone in the apartment. We go back to the kitchen and things start getting hot again, when suddenly we hear a knock on the door. And guess whose voice we hear outside? Yeah, of course, her best friend. So I'm like, okay, yeah, no, that's it, bye. And as I'm about to leave, she stomps her feet on top of the couch, putting her leg between me and the door, and asks me, so what are we? And I'm like, nothing. We just kissed, and listen, I'm sorry, I just went through a breakup, so I'm not really looking for anything more than that right now. I'm sorry if that disappoints you. And that was true, but also I didn't want to get into that whole mess at all. She goes, but can we still mess around some more? And before I can say anything, the best friend knocks again. So we open the door and he is there, and then he says sorry again, and I say chill, I'm leaving anyways. And before I can go down the stairs, the girl calls me up and goes, my friend is too drunk, can you make sure he gets home safe? And since I can't for the life of me say no to that, I end up in a cab with him 5 minutes later. During the trip he starts telling me how much he loves her, but that she hurt him, and so on and so on. And I can totally understand the guy because, again, I've been in his position, but at this point I just want to get home and forget about the whole mess. But I have to make sure he gets home safe, so we stop in front of his house. And as he is about to leave, he turns around and says, please take good care of her, she is happier with you. He gets off the car and walks off into the night. A month goes by, and I see both the girl and her best friend walking down the street holding hands as a couple. Story 7. I have a couple of stories. First was the time when I was trying to meet up with a 24-year-old woman, and instead, there was a 40-plus-year-old man. His logic was that since you already came here, you'd want to hang out anyway. Except I didn't. I left quite rudely. Then there have been the constant times gay men have sent me very vulgar messages, talking about how they would pleasure me. And some of them actually made me feel physically ill because of the descriptions. This is very odd, considering I always advertise I am a straight male, but apparently to some guys, straight means in the closet. Let's see, what else? Oh, there was the date with literally the most boring woman on the planet, who also lied about her looks. When I met up with her, not only was she a little bit hard to look at, a lot of wrinkles for a 30-year-old, but she was literally so boring. She literally had nothing to say about herself aside from, I like to read, and I sometimes drink wine. She mostly wanted me to constantly talk about myself, but I needed some form of response from her aside from practically blank stares. Then there was the woman who was quite clearly not from the US, and, well, this one was a bit odd. She sent a picture of her hair, saying she took it last week, and when I showed her that the picture was from 2001 and plastered all over Google, she insisted it was her hair. She kept trying to have me call her, and gave me, for different phone numbers. She kept insisting on a meet up, and despite me saying, no, you have not been truthful, I do not want to meet up, she kept thinking I wanted to. I'm not entirely certain what her motive was, but I'm glad I never met up. Then there was the time I met up with this blonde woman. We decided to go to dinner, and literally within the first minute of us sitting down, she pulls out her phone and starts talking to a friend. For nearly 10 minutes this happens until she stupidly said, yeah, I'm on a date with this loser. I'm gonna make it seem like I'm gonna let him have me, but just use him for a free meal. Honestly, who the hell admits that on a phone conversation during the date? When I got up to leave, she got a little pissy, until I quoted exactly what she said. That's when she turned rather red, starting to yell how I shouldn't eavesdrop on people's phone conversations. I simply left. I should also mention I picked her up. She didn't have a car with her. Another story to share. 2 years and 2 states later, I'm still a little hesitant about posting this date. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't understand why anyone posts decade-old profile photos. I'm a curvy girl. If a guy isn't into that, I'd much rather he politely ignore my first contact email than do a disgusted double take when he first sees me. Gentlemen, it doesn't matter how good you looked 10 years ago when you had more hair and less belly. If your photo is so out of date a woman can't recognize you, I promise there is no hope she will look past your flabby exterior and see the shining human being within. Instead, she's going to take one look at you and assume everything you've told her is a lie. Don't be that guy. Officer Creepy was succinct, flattering, and interested in meeting over dinner, his treat. At the time, I thought any excuse to visit one of Bardstown Road's tastier houses of meaty delights was a good one, so I agreed to meet him on a nice, unromantic Tuesday. Based on his profile, I expected a slightly straight-lacked, pleasantly plump, curly-haired man 8 to 10 years my senior. When I showed up, the restaurant was full of the usual Bardstown Road crowd of hipsters on dates, young professionals out for a night of adventure, and cheerful tables full of heavily tattooed and pierced people who work on the strip. I took a seat by the bar and let the waitress know if I was here for a first date. If he stood me up, I'd order some empanadas to take home. Internet date? She leaned in conspiratorially. Is there a special rescue signal I should know about? This is one of the reasons I loved first dates on Bardstown. I grinned and gave her the Vulcan, live long and prosper salute. Suddenly, a hand clapped on my shoulder. Let's take this outside. The bald, jolly stranger behind me was older than my father. Excuse me? Chris Rachel and I will take a large carafe of sangria and a table outside, he told the waitress. Okay, he knew my name. Either this was my date or I was finally about to be recruited into a secret government agency. Come on, Shield. Please be real. I've always wanted to live on a helicarrier. Sadly, it was my date. He carried the sangria out and poured for me. I drank nervously while looking over the menu. He silently topped me off, carefully watching me drink. You look a little different than I expected, I said. He looked at me like I'd just revealed a state secret. They said to use my best photo. When was that one taken? In the photo, he leaned over the edge of a boat floating in front of some mountains. Now, I suspected he'd have a heart attack if he tried to hike a mountain and would sink straight to the bottom of a lake if he tried to swim. When I was 42. What year was that? His profile said he was 44. The last 2 years must have been very hard on him. He glared at me. 1996. I sighed. He was older than my father. He topped off my glass again. What do you think I do for a living? I really couldn't guess. A desk job. He obviously didn't get much exercise. He crossed his arms. I'll give you a hint. You wouldn't be here if you knew. Garbage collector? I guessed. Try again. Accountant. I'm serious, he growled. So am I. I suck at this game. Just tell me, what do you do for a living? I'm a police officer. He refilled my sangria. I noticed he hadn't taken a sip of his own. Great. He topped off my glass every time I took a sip. I tried to gauge whether or not I'd had a whole glass yet. Just to be safe, I knew I was trapped for at least 2 hours if I didn't want to risk him accusing me of drinking and driving. I reached into my purse to try and summon a rescue. Turn off your cell phone. I don't want you texting all through dinner. There went my primary lifeline. Moving very slowly, I did as I was told. The waitress emerged to take our orders. I tried holding up my Vulcan salute slightly behind his head, but his eyes flickered to my reflection in the restaurant's window. He pulled out his badge and showed it to the waitress. Bring us a pitcher of water and come back for our order in 15 minutes. She promptly disappeared, avoiding eye contact with us both. Once she was gone, he got down to business. I took down your plates after I saw you get out of your car. Let's get something straight. I've seen your blog. You're not writing about me. If you do, I'm sure a girl like you has done things you regret. You don't want to regret them more. My eyes widened in shock. Nothing makes a date go better than liquoring a girl up and threatening her. I only write about the bad dates, I reminded him. Honestly, most of my dates are just plain conversation. We don't really feel a spark. We go our separate ways. No harm done. I gave him an optimistic smile. He laughed bitterly. How a date ends is always up to the woman. I couldn't quite tell if that was a threat, a suggestion, or both. He topped off my sangria again, then looked me in the eyes. You'd regret writing about me. It's a bad idea. Now take a drink. Relax. I dutifully put the glass to my lips. Over the next 2 hours, I learned that after his upcoming retirement, he fantasized about building an isolated house on a cliff face in Chile, where supplies would be delivered by donkey once a week and no one would bother him. I pointed out I'm a city girl who loves living in a walkable neighborhood with my own corner bookstore, restaurant, and bar where the staff knows me. I learned he resented people with advanced education because, according to him, the only purpose of an academic degree was to indoctrinate people into the liberal agenda. I pointed out I listed my MA in history on my online profile. I learned he thought the space program was a stupid waste of money. I pointed out I follow the X Prize religiously and covet stock in Bigelow Aerospace. Under other circumstances, I would have left over an hour earlier, but I wasn't sure how to get away from Officer Creepy without being accused of a DUI. I hadn't touched my sangria since his revelation. After a while, I had to know. Listen, I asked as politely as I could. I'm pretty honest on my profile. I'm a liberal, overeducated, geeky city girl. We don't have anything in common. Why did you write to me? Girls on OkCupid put out. The horror in my face must have fazed him. He grunted and looked away. Never mind. You're fatter than I expected. That was the first good news I'd heard all night. I'd rub mud in my hair and roll around in trash if it would get me out of this horrifying date. I like lanky tech nerds built like a sack of hangers. This conservative cop was not only older than my father and willing to lie about his age and interests to con a woman into meeting him, but he had the graceless figure of an overripe pumpkin. I scrambled to come up with an appropriate response that would save face for him without resulting in retribution for me. It was really interesting meeting you, but I'm looking for a relationship, not a one-night stand. I'm sorry you wasted your evening. Let me buy dinner. Get the sangria too. The carafe sat untouched since he revealed he was secretly a cop. I felt lucky he didn't tell me to buy him a gift certificate and a box of donuts. I waited silently while the waitress boxed up both our dinners for him to take home. This better not show up on your blog. While I waited to sign the debit card receipt, he huffed off to find some other women to intimidate. Once he was gone, the waitress topped off my carafe of sangria before sealing it with aluminum foil and a rubber band. Take it home. She gave my shoulder a sympathetic squeeze. You look like you could use it. Story 8. Went to a really nice restaurant I'd been wanting to try out for a while, but being a student, I could only but dream. So when this guy took me out, I was actually very excited and impressed that he offered to take me and pay, which I would usually decline, but he was a man of means, and I really wanted to try this place out, so I humbly accepted. This place was amazing from the get-go. Beautifully decorated, the service was stellar, and the menu looked so goddamned incredible that I seriously think my face was in a permanent state of happy. See, I love food. I appreciate it when it's well done, and good food is one of my pleasures in life. So having already gone through a glass of good red each and learned a bit more about this guy and what he does for a living, I was ready to make my order. I'll have the fried brie wedges and red currant chutney, please. No, he says, waving his finger at me and turning to our waitress. She'll have a green leaf salad. What? I figured it was just him trying to be like the cavalier guys you see in movies who order for their dates. Whatever, but I really did want my gooey brie. A green salad in a restaurant like this was a bit of a waste, but he was paying. Then he poured himself another glass of red, finishing the bottle before ordering for himself, and announcing to the waitress, and she'll also have a water. At his point, I was feeling a little bit put out. I don't actually like water on its own, as odd as that sounds, so I asked the waitress for a cranberry juice. For some reason, this seemed to miff the guy, as he just waved his hand and grunted. But I tried to continue our conversation, though his mood had noticeably changed. I figured I must have overstepped. Eventually my salad arrived with his frickin' brie, ass. My salad was just that, leaves on a plate. So I asked the waitress if I could have some dressing or croutons. No, she's fine, he piped up, waving the server off. See, this actually did piss me off. I've been a server, and being waved off or whistled for is incredibly disrespectful and degrading. So I tried to shoot her an apologetic look, but I don't think she noticed. Damn, that brie looked as awesome on his plate as it would have looked on mine. Hey, can I try a bit of your brie? It looks amazing. Instead of answering, he kept chewing and waved his fork over my salad, gesturing for me to eat it. I didn't. I figured the least the guy could do was answer me once he'd finished chewing. I don't want you getting fat. You're a woman, not a boar. Bearing in mind, this was my first date with the guy, and even if it wasn't, the line had been thoroughly and unforgivably crossed. So I put down my rabbit food, grabbed my coat, and told him to marry a skeleton if it's more to his preference. Another story for you. I finally created an account for this post. I have 2 dates that tie for the worst date I've ever had. First, I agreed to go on a blind date with a co-worker's son. He recently moved back in with her, and she wanted him out of the house for a night. He had no car and no job, but it was just a favor, so it wasn't a big deal. We're supposed to get something to eat, then go to a movie. I pick him up, and we go through normal introductions on the way to the restaurant. The conversation during dinner consists of him rotating between bad-mouthing his mother and asking inappropriate questions about my sexual preferences. When the bill arrives, he informs me that his mother gave him money to pay, but he's not going to. He'd rather buy alcohol later. No problem, I just want to get out of there. I'm hoping I can silently get through the movie and go home. Nope. During the previews, he asked, "Do you want to see it now?" What? I look over, and he has his penis out. What? This is when he informs me that it would be a disservice to myself to turn him down, as nobody wants to date a single mother. I walked out with him shouting that I can't just leave him there, and he'll tell his mother on me. His mother never asked what happened, and I only told her to never ask me for a favor again. Second, I was about 27 going back to school. A guy in math class that is a little older than me keeps asking me out. He seems nice enough, maybe just a little shy, so I finally agree. He picks me up and has a nice picnic-type dinner planned. We go to a local tourist spot, we live in wooded country, and all is going well. Then he starts talking about his ex, and how she just quit talking to him out of the blue. He gets to the point of tears and keeps rambling on about how he misses her. I'm kicking myself for letting him pick me up. This was going nowhere fast, and I want to go home. He starts asking me for advice on what he should do, so I ask him for details on what happened between them. Might as well, right? Well, it turns out he shot and killed her father, the only parent she had, and got off on self-defense. And he wonders why she suddenly stopped talking to him. WTF? Are you serious right now? Story 9. I have a few of these stories. 1. A girl messaged me about 6 months ago. She had a decent profile, mentioning going to film school in NYC. Along with a love for comics, I was intrigued. Beyond that, she was really cute and 5 feet 7 inches, which was perfect for a 6 feet 4 inches man such as myself. After a few messages back and forth, I asked her out on a date, in which she mentioned she was nervous about meeting in person. The fears were completely reasonable. She had a friend who had a terrible experience with online dating, taking to a guy who ended up being a 40-year-old man that sent fake pictures. I agreed that we can text for a few weeks until she was comfortable. Once she became comfortable, she asked to meet at a public place, just in case I was not who my profile said I was. When we met, she was easily 40 pounds heavier than her pictures, about 3 to 4 inches shorter, and that was only the beginning of the lies. She was not currently going to film school, but instead planned on going once she finished community college. Furthermore, at 23 she had been in community college since she was 18, and it wasn't because she was working during this time to afford it. She was currently living with her parents, and was unable to drive to the date. Her parents had to drive her. After the date, she continued to message me for 2 months, and is the reason I now only give out a Google Voice number to my dates. Understandably, there is nothing wrong with going back to school, or even living with your parents during a hard time. This, however, was not the case. She was neither looking for work, nor had immediate plans to move on with her life. 2.1 of my dates knew they had Scrabble at this bar, and decided to play board games there. She was so into the game, that she had not interest in talking and getting to know each other, just play Scrabble. The game went on forever, and I seriously just wanted to go home by the end of the night. Sure, Scrabble may be fun for some people, but not on a first date at Prohibition Bar, especially when you refuse to talk between turns. Afterwards, she talked about how she cuts her own hair, her daddy issues, and how she sees a psychiatrist for image issues. 3. I am at a wine bar with a date. We are having a good conversation, and the date was going decently, not bad, not great. After a drink, she starts slurring her speech a bit, and then says, "Can I ask you a serious question? Are you gay?" After explaining that I am not even bisexual, she then say, "Well, I am not that into metrosexual men." This girl proceeded to message me 5 more times on OKC to see if we can hang out as friends. 4. And my favorite, my first date on OKC got drunk and vomited at a bar. When I offered to walk her home, she refused, saying she does not want some stranger from the internet knowing where she lives. I even offered to walk her a few blocks from her place, in which she still refused. I am not going to leave some drunk girl, no matter how obnoxious, stranded in the middle of downtown SJ, so I just walk around town with her for 3 hours. During that time, she talked about her pet rats and her scoliosis. After she sobered up, I let her drive home, in which she then texted me the next day to say, I did not feel a romantic connection. 5. Story from a friend. Lovely young lady, attractive, funny, and loved the same movies I do. She had a sort of free-spirited thing about life that at times my structured engineer self can't wrap my head around. Though I figured, what the hell, let's meet for drinks and see. I meet her a couple blocks from the bar, as we both live walking distance. She's giggling and silly almost from second one. She then proceeds to tell me about a huge bowl her roommate and her smoked before heading out. Now, I have no opinion on the substance. I tried it, didn't like it, think within limits it being legal is fine. That's not the issue. It would be like showing up drunk to a date in my mind. We get drinks and she's starving, checking all the stereotype boxes. Gets more food than her slim frame can handle, and we chat. It's really hard to talk to her. Have you ever tried to talk to someone stoned when you are sober? She claims she's fine, but she does it almost every day, and someone better accept that. The date goes on longer than it should because she got 2 full meals, and because I'm a sucker for conversation that, while interesting, I know won't lead anywhere. We part ways and I exchange a nice hug. Within 2 minutes I get a text saying I'm too dull and boring and need to loosen up. Well, I am an engineer, and I'll admit I'm a tad structured, but really? I politely told her showing up high to a date was immature. She freaked out, name-calling, saying how I'm a loser. Yes, the loser with multiple graduate degrees making $85K a year at a Fortune 500, and you move from random artsy job to artsy job. I'm too lame for her, and oh, my nose is ugly. Hey, I can't change my genetics for having a big nose, which the last 2 women I dated, who were great looking, seemed to think was masculine. Story 10. I moved to Utah a few years ago, and I'm an agnostic lesbian, so I knew this would be terrible going in. First girl took me to a bunch of Ted Bundy sites, which admittedly was kind of interesting, but probably should have been a red flag. We slept together a few times, and I tried at one point to ask her a little more about her sexual preferences, so we could explore some things if she liked. She basically screamed, "Don't you want to find out?" And I was like, I'm okay. Didn't see her again. Seemed like she was still hung up on an ex anyway. Second girl was really cute and had a hot tub, but come to find out she was a raging alcoholic. She had a bunch of gay/bi women over for a party, and they were all sloppy drunks and seemed like shitty people. The whole group had fucked and dated each other. They were weirdly aggressive and all wanted to arm wrestle. I love a competition at least, so I was like, bet. I beat them all, and we got to this big bitch. I was doubting I would win this round, but I did. She got butthurt and demanded we try left-handed. I still beat her, so at least I had that high. I saw her a few more times BC. I was bored and I hate myself. But one morning she called McDonald's and started screaming that she couldn't get chicken nuggies at 9 a.m., and I just couldn't anymore. Next girl was on and off for a while, and she was a lot of fun, but also seemed to have some anger issues or something going on. She had a dream that we were drinking blood one night and woke up flipping out. I had to sit on the couch and contemplate why I was here in Utah trying to date all these religious trauma girls. She got mad that I didn't reassure her it wasn't real. Why do I need to reassure you that I'm not in a blood cult? Later she started dick riding some guy and told me she had to get plan B and maybe she was bi. Okay, enjoy your journey I guess, but I was past caring at this point, so her jab didn't get a reaction out of me like she wanted. She continued to try to get a rise out of me by mentioning several other partners for the next few months. Finally I went off on her, and she got filed in the blocked section with all the others, so I could have blessed peace. I'll gloss over all the girls that think they are poly here, but don't really know what that means. My poly lifestyle died in Utah, BC. Holy hell, it's bad. The last girl I met on Hinge. We went for a short hike and camped for a bit. She was really shy, and I wasn't sure if she even liked me. I cooked shrimp scampi over the fire and massaged her hands. BC, they always hurt her. It started getting late, so we packed up. I sliced the shit out of my hands on my knife in the dark and was bleeding everywhere, but I tried to keep cool about it as I drove her back and didn't say anything. BC, I'm in a demonic blood cult and all. I got out to wish her good night. She gave me the shyest and fastest peck on the lips that completely surprised me, and ran so quickly inside that it seemed like she vaporized into thin air. I was left standing there and was like, okay, I guess she likes me. Anyway, we are married now, and if I can find love in this weird-ass state, then so can you. Another story here for you. I was dating someone I went to middle school with and reconnected with after high school. She had been living with a man she was engaged with, but he kicked her out because he got cold feet. So after finding out she was basically sleeping in the park, I just let her come stay with me. She lived with me for about a year, no issues, I thought. I lost my job, and the house I was renting was sold out from under me at around the same time. So we moved in with some of my family. I asked her to get a job to help make ends meet and pay our cell phone bill. I was already working again at this point. She went and got a job and worked for about 2 months before getting fired and not telling me. She then proceeded to have me or my family take her to work every day and pick her up every day. Then she would have a friend pick her up from the parking lot, and she would go sleep around with every guy she knew and make them pay her so she could hide the fact that she wasn't working anymore. Then one day she got dropped off by her ex, the one that kicked her out. She said that they were just friends when I asked her about it. Found out from one of my other friends later that night that he caught them at a movie theater making out, and she promised that she would sleep with him, my friend, if he didn't tell me. Fast forward 2 days after I actually started asking our mutual friends what was up, she had told them all that I was into reclaiming. I am not. So they never bothered to let me know when they caught her sleeping around because they all thought I was into it. I confront her about it, At this point I knew about 8 guys she was sleeping with and wasn't 100% sure about another 4. She threw a fit, started destroying and throwing around furniture, tipped over a fridge, and pulled a TV off of a wall. All while saying if I was a better boyfriend, I would have just let her sit around at home all day, and I would have paid for everything she wouldn't have had to sleep around. I told her to get out of the house until she calmed down, and we could talk about what to do next. When she gets back 2 days later, she stayed with her ex. She decided to throw a brick at my house trying to break windows, but fortunately she wasn't exactly strong enough. My mom pulled up, she was coming over for dinner, and she threw a brick and hit my mom in the chest. So cops were called, she was arrested. We didn't end up pressing charges on the condition that she gets her stuff, leaves, and never comes back on the property. She does, and I'm there along with one of my friends and an officer. The officer asks me to answer a few questions, and my friend watches her, but doesn't know whose stuff is what. So she comes out, throws a box into her ex's car, and takes off. I got back to my room to find that she stole my PS2 and all of my games, stole my wallet, social security card and birth certificate, and she had cut the power cable to my PC while my friend had run to the bathroom. Told the cop, who was still there, and he went and found them and took my wallet, social and birth certificate back, but because I had no proof that the PS2 and games were mine, he couldn't do anything about those. I decided to stay single for about a year after that, but when I go to re-enter the dating pool, I come to find out that she had been dragging my name through the mud at every bar, club, and venue I frequented while we had been together. According to her, I beat her, threw her out without cause, stole her money, attacked her, destroyed all of her things before she could pick them up, ECT. She also did this to 6 of the guys I had contacted and confirmed that she was sleeping with. And even now, 10 years later, I occasionally go on dates, and someone will say, "Oh wait, you're that guy who beat," and our asterisk his GF a few years ago. Worked out after she was gone that she had ultimately been sleeping with 16 different men, who all thought they were exclusive. And she scammed all of them, and myself, into paying her way for a while there. I would tell you all her names so you can avoid her, but I found out from her mom late last year that she had voluntarily entered treatment for schizophrenia and pathological lying, and I really hope she gets better. Story 11. She wanted to do a picnic of sorts, but it was July, incredibly humid, and a bit steamy/rainy that day. She insisted we did the picnic deal. Spent an hour getting this table nicely set up with food, dessert, candles, a nice tablecloth, cushions for us to sit on comfortably. Had never done this, but was trying hard to impress. Was actually quite proud of the end result. She arrives 15 minutes late. There was no connection hardly at all. She was not talkative, despite spending hours on the phone texting for a week leading up to date. She said she loved Latin/Caribbean food, so I got takeout from one of the best places local, a kind of assortment of things. She didn't touch any of it. She sat and looked at the river in the background, and I asked her a couple of times if she was okay. If she would like to move closer to the river? Was there anything I could do to make her more comfortable? And she would just smile and say no, and that it was all wonderful, again, while not touching a single thing except the bottled water she brought. I sat through this for almost an hour. Finally, I just flat out said, "I guess I was expecting a bit more conversation, or at least some engagement in this. I'm sorry, it seems this date was a bust." And she just awkwardly smiled and said, "I'm sorry too, I can see you put a lot of effort into it." So because I had nothing to lose, I asked her what was wrong or what I did wrong. And she responds, "Nothing really, I just think this is all a bit overboard for a first date. It's kind of cringe, like you're desperate." I can't even lie. My feelings were pretty hurt as I put together the date based on her cues and questions I had subtly asked. Even went ahead with the gross atmosphere of 90-degree weather and steamy, post-storm humidity. I wanted to respond, but I just bit my tongue and said, "Well, if you're not going to eat, I sure am." And I went to town on the food while she sat there. There was a couple sitting on a swing near us, and I went, "Hey guys, you hungry?" And as it turned out, they were on a date, but were broke, so were just enjoying each other's company. And I invited them over to enjoy the table full of food with me. She left a few minutes after they came over, having said nothing since I started eating. And after she left, I had the best time with these 2 strangers, eating and laughing and telling them what happened, and both of them telling me I deserved better. I'm still good friends with them some 10 years later now. Never heard from the girl again outside of a single text later that evening saying, "I'm sorry, that was a bitcha thing for me to say to you." I guess expecting me to respond, which I never did, just blocked her number and moved on. Another story from my friend. He showed me his car, and he pulled up a breathalyzer that was installed by the driver's seat. He explained that he had to blow in it or the car wouldn't start, and also every 5 to 10 minutes or so the thing would beep and he would have to blow in it again. He made it seem like it was no big deal. He said jump in, and we can grab dinner. I said I'm just gonna drive my own car to the restaurant, because I never let strangers drive me anywhere. He seemed totally shocked but said okay. We got to the restaurant, and he said he didn't have any money, and asked if we could walk around a park instead. I said okay. This park was sketchy and gross. He immediately hiked his leg up really high on a tree like almost doing the splits, and said he had to stretch. He then tried to coax me to walk some isolated trails, and I flat out said no, and that I wasn't comfortable being isolated alone with someone I didn't know. He kept saying, "But you do know me." He then proceeded to talk about a bunch of boring nonsense. He asked if I wanted to go back to his place to have sex. I said no. He then got really annoyed and said he was wasting his time on this pointless date. I said I agree, and I'm leaving. I started walking back to my car, and he said, "Oh, I parked much closer. Let me give you a ride back to your car." And he put his arm around me hard and was basically making it so I couldn't get away. I played dumb and said something like, "Wow, you're so strong, do you work out?" Blah blah. He began walking me to his car without letting me move. I decided to play into it and said, "You know that you're holding me against you, I kinda do want to go back to your place." He lit up and said, "Oh yes, we can have so much fun." We got back to his car and he walked me towards the passenger side. By this point he had let up a bit thinking I wanted to bang him. My heart started racing and my head was screaming for me to get away. I felt like if I got in that car I was doomed. Suddenly I said, "OMG, what was that?" pointing behind him. He turned to look and I fucking Olympic sprinted away. He started to chase me screaming at me, but he was too slow. He ran to get back in his car and peeled out trying to follow me. I called 911 and hid. I was able to give them his car and plate and description, etc. He didn't try to find me for long. He left the park and raced away. I stayed hidden until the police came. They drove me back to my car and said they would follow up with me, but that he hasn't technically done anything illegal. After that I only met in public in the daytime for dating. It was scary as fuck. Story 12. In 2020 I was young and kinda desperate. 17, and just looking for people to hang out with really. So I met this guy on a dating app. He seemed nice enough. Not my type, but had potential for a glow-up, you could say, so it motivated me to give him a chance. He was 22, and I was stupid. It was a hot summer afternoon. I met up with him on a corner between our houses, and we went for a walk. He was friendly, too friendly, and he stunk. He was absolutely fucking rank. Just imagine the worst body odor you've ever smelled in your life, and times that by 3. Now, I was trying to give him a chance, but he was wanting to hold my hand, and all I could think about was how dirty his fingernails were, how greasy his hair was. OFFS, just thinking about it right now is making me gag. We ended up sitting under a tree to talk, and he beckoned me to sit next to him, where he then put his arm around my shoulders. I turned my head away to just get a whiff of a fresh breeze because otherwise I'd fucking pass out. He's putting his other hand in my leg, nodding his head, until he says, Yeah, this could definitely be something. Gross. Anyway, I offered to get us ice cream after he made it known he didn't have any money, and we walked him home after that. He lived with his grandparents at the time, in their basement. He offered to show me around, and politely I agreed, until he took us downstairs. We got into this whole virgin talk, you know how it goes. I told him I was, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for that yet. He puts his hand on my knee and tilts his head towards a mystery room. I can take care of that for you right now. I excused myself and ran home. I burned the shirt and exfoliated like hell when I realized his sweaty BO smell had soaked into my shoulder. I know this may seem like I was super superficial, but like I said, he wasn't really my type, and on paper his interests and hobbies seemed sweet enough. He was just down on his luck currently, so I thought I'd de-sweet my judgment to the side and give him a chance. Holy fuck, I sometimes feel like I can still smell him. Then we have another story. I actually have a shitty MS Paint comic somewhere I drew about this like 30 years ago, El Mail. Strapping cost, this one is crazy. Went on a sort of date with a guy at a bar in the city that I frequented to play pool and get some dinner maybe. It was a dead slow night as we were getting some shitty winter weather. I'ma call him Dumbshit Danny. At that point, we were the only 2 people in the bar. Dumbshit Danny started just pounding beers and got beyond wasted. Started badgering me to go home with him. After repeated no's, I finally snapped at him, and he lost his shit. Let loose this howling wail, and threw himself at my legs. Scream crying, with snot and tears pouring down his face, he started begging me to go home with him. I could not get him loose from my legs, and started jabbing him with the pool stick I was holding to get him to let go. I looked up over his head to exchange dumbfounded looks with the equally nonplussed bartender, who finally jumped into action. I think he was so shocked by the guy's behavior that it took him a minute to process. I know I was, having never seen anybody behave like that in my life. Bartender has to drag dude off me, and winds up dragging him outside, because he won't leave. Dude is ugly, crying the whole time. Oh, but wait, it gets better. Like a dummy, I stuck around too long chatting with the bartender, who was a friend of mine. At first it was kind of a stick around to make sure dude gets gone. But then I got to yakking and lost track of time. Was interrupted by another patron coming in the back who hollered, "Mad. There's someone out here kicking your car." Me and the bartender rushed out to find he had gone and gotten his equally drunk friend and come back. The friend was kicking my car and screaming that I was a slut while dumbshit Danny was laying face down on the ground next to my car. Not passed out, just laying there. I guess he was still crying. What the fuck he was doing. Before any of us sane people had time to process, this little tableau caught the attention of a cop in the Wendy's drive-thru next door. He comes straight over the curb to get to the bar parking lot. Dude kicking my car gets arrested. Dumbshit Danny gets told to GTFO, or he would get arrested too, having been told once already to leave. He slinks off into the night. I hope to never see him again, but that was too hopeful. Because round about 3 a.m. dumbshit Danny shows up at my house. I still lived with my parents in a small town at the time, a good 45 minutes from the city. This was back in the phone book days, so it wasn't too hard to find my parents' house, the phone book for this town being the size of a magazine, and us having a unique name. My stepdad gets woken up by dumbshit standing in our front yard yelling incoherently. Calls the county sheriff. Dude tries to tell him I invited him over, but nobody is buying it, lol. He finally gets arrested. Bails out. Immediately starts emailing me all this nonsensical shit. Email after email. Finally I wind up having to get a restraining order against the guy. He's sending me hundreds of emails and showing up at the places I hang out. He broke it 3 times, getting arrested all 3 times. Finally after that last arrest, I never heard from him again. 20 or so years later I'm at that same bar, and his name comes up in conversation. I asked what happened to the guy as I'd known him back in the 90s. I did not mention any of the history I had with him. Just dumbass Danny. I used to know him. Whatever happened to him? Apparently he had a bad breakup and moved to California in 00. It's me. I was the bad breakup LMAO nutbag. Story 13. Younger sister set me up on a blind date with an older coworker. Said she thought we'd get along great. When I arrived at her apartment, it was a mess, with clothes and dirty plates strewn about, and she herself was already half soused and unsteady. Orange lipstick half smeared, green eyeshadow, cockeyed eyelashes, clunky wooden jewelry, laddered hose, scuffed and shapeless flats, one safety pin bra strap showing. You get the picture. Strike 1. On the ride to dinner, she repeated a non-stop stream of inanities from supermarket gossip mags. Sister hadn't told her I'd worked in the film and TV production industry for 30-plus years. I had worked with, or at least had met, many of the people she was running her mouth about. Strike 2. I took her to a new, high-end Mexican restaurant, a reservation for which I had had to call in a big favor from our production coordinator. While we waited at the bar, she ordered and downed 3 shots of Patron in 15 minutes flat. When we were shown to our table, she flirted shamelessly with the waiter, then ordered 2 of the most expensive appetizer, lobster tacos, the most expensive entree, filet mignon con Hitlercoke, and a pitcher of margaritas, for her. I was driving and couldn't drink. Strike 3. Just as her shockingly expensive entree arrived, she loudly announced she had to go to the little girl's room, and abandoned it to get cold. Strike 4. When she staggered up, she pushed her chair into a waiter behind her, which caused him to spill the carafe of red wine he was pour onto the next table and its 2 occupants. Strike 5. She didn't even notice. Strike 6. After she was out of sight, I apologized to our neighbors and put a 50 on their table to pay for their cleaning. Then I found our waiter, paid for our meal, paid for the neighbor's wine, gave him a generous tip, and booked. 3 days later, the woman actually cornered my sister in the ladies' room and asked why I hadn't called her yet, because apparently we'd had a wonderful time. She'd actually become so blotto after those margaritas that in the morning she didn't remember I'd abandoned her after the first hour, or that she'd had to take a cab home. Strike 7. Was supremely pissed at sister who figured I'd get along great with a ditzy, unkempt, barely functioning alcoholic slob. Another story to add for you. I went on a date with someone from Facebook dating. I was pretty fresh out of a relationship and had recently discovered FB dating. I was caught off guard by how many conversations I was having with different women. I had used POF and OKC off and on for years prior, and had only talked to a very small handful of women from those sites in that time, and had only ever met 2, including my recent ex. So I was texting this girl back and forth. Wasn't really the most enthralling conversation in the world, but we agreed to meet up for dinner regardless. She lived about an hour away from me, so I was driving out to meet her. On the way, she texted me asking to cancel the date. I pulled off the highway to text her back, letting her know I was already on my way, but had only just gotten on the highway, so we could postpone. She changed her mind and said I could come meet her. I asked if she was sure, and she said yes, so I continued in her direction. When I got to the address she gave me, I let her know I had arrived, and shortly after, she emerged from between 2 houses, looking nothing like her photos and dressed all the way down. I didn't think much of it when I saw it, but once she got in my car, I was overwhelmed with the stench of what I could only describe as raw garbage. I didn't comment on it, and carried on with our date, quietly wondering to myself if I had just picked up a homeless girl. We went to Kelsey's, had dinner and some entirely unremarkable conversation, and called it a day. I paid for per meals, and she had me drop her off at a different location than I picked her up from. Never spoke to her again. Story 14. I never get bored of telling this one. A few years ago I met this guy, whom I'll call Matt. Matt and I had some mutual friends. He invited me to a concert. We lived in different towns, about 15 kilometers apart. The concert was to take place in a third town, about 15 kilometers away from the town he lived in. After the concert, we would go back to his town, and I would sleep at my best friend's house. They both lived in the same town. So Matt comes and picked me up. I had a bag with a few things like pajamas and clothes for the next day. I leave my bag in his car and go to his apartment, because he insisted on me meeting his mom. This was the first red flag for me, because why would you like your mom to meet me on our first date? I ignored it and went to see his mom. For the whole agonizing hour we were there, she talked about his ex. How good-looking she was, how smart she was, how funny, and so on and so forth. She concluded with, I don't really understand why they broke up. I knew the girl. I didn't like her, which made it even more cringe for me. They had been together for 2 weeks, so it wasn't really that big. I stood through all this tirade stoically, just smiled and nodded until he was ready to leave. I left my bag in his car and left for the concert. I couldn't drink anything as I was on antibiotics for a dental problem, so I gave him my free shot, which all the 15 first girls at the concert received. Besides that shot, he drank a beer. Because of this little quantity of alcohol, he was absolutely wasted, slurring his words, saying stupid things, not walking properly, etc. The concert took place in a bar, and he stopped the concert in the middle of it, telling the band they couldn't sing properly. They gave him a microphone, because he wanted to prove to them he was better. They put 3 instrumentals for him, but not one of them was good. I felt really embarrassed, so I went outside to smoke, not really knowing what to do. While I was smoking a cigarette, one of the singers came outside and started talking to me, mainly making funny remarks about my date. I told him I was sorry for his behavior, but the guy was cool and okay with it. At that moment, Matt came outside and proceeded to accuse me of cheating on him with the singer, because why else would we make conversation? He told me I would have to make it home on my own, and I told him that was okay. I didn't really feel safe going home with him. I took my phone out of my pocket to find someone who could take me home, but my battery was dead. I could not find a charger for my phone in all that bar, so it became a problem, because I didn't want to leave with him, but I also couldn't find any other way back home, as there weren't any buses or trains. One of his friends assured me it was okay. They would safely take me to my friend's house. So we eventually left. We reached his town, and the driver, Matt's friend driving Matt's car, stopped at the end of the street on which my best friend lived. I didn't have time to get out of the car, because Matt, who was in the back seat, caught my hand. I was in the passenger's seat, and told the driver I would spend the night at his place. The driver started arguing with him, and that was when I saw a police car parked right across from us. I said, "If I don't get out of this car this very minute, I will shout as loud as I can. The driver panicked, took Matt's hand away from me. I exited the car, and I was happy. Just a few more steps were between me and my friend's house. But things couldn't stop there, could they? While I was crossing the street, I heard a car door closing behind me. I looked back. Matt was out of the car, coming after me. I started running, knocked on the police car's window, and the policemen exited their car. They asked me what was wrong. I told them. I gave them my ID, and they told me to wait in their car. Matt started shouting at them, calling me stupid, telling them I was a D*UG addict. I was a liar, and so on and so forth. The policeman could see he was drunk, could see I was being calm and eloquent, so they soon realized who to trust. They fined him for talking badly to and about me in front of them. He threatened them they would hear from his lawyer. They just ignored him and got back into the car. They could see where I lived in my ID, so they asked me if I wanted them to take me home. I didn't want to cause any further trouble, so I told them it was okay. I could just go to my friend's house. They insisted on driving me the short distance. Bless their kind souls. I spent the night at my friend's place, and the next day, I realized my bag was still in his car. I thought about abandoning it. It contained some clothes, some makeup, my hair straightener, and my antibiotics. But my friend told me she would send her mom to take it back from him, being sure he wouldn't cause a scene in front of her mom. So the mom meets him, takes my back, give it back to me. Everything in the back was ripped, cut, destroyed. Everything. I could not contain myself. I called and cursed him for 5 minutes straight, without repeating myself, and without giving him a chance to say anything. The next day, I heard he had told all his friends that the fine he received was 10 times the amount it actually was. So yeah, none of the other bad dates I ever had beats this one. Story 15. Forewarning, this is going to be a long one. So a few years back, I went on a date with a guy I met on Tinder. I know this should have been my first red flag. I was 23 at the time, and he was 22. We had been talking for a while, and he seemed normal enough. So when he asked me on a brunch date, I said yes. He wanted to pick me up, and I stupidly agreed. So it all started off normal. The conversation was okay, and he was nice, but I wasn't really feeling it. Well, come the end of our meal, he says that he has a few more hours before he has to work and wants to keep hanging out. I couldn't come up with a good excuse not to. So instead of taking it back to a house, I suggested I show him around town a little. He was new to the area and said okay. So, after driving around for about an hour and a half, his truck starts overheating. He jumps out and checks under the hood and realizes that he got a hole in his radiator. So we head back to my place, and I told him that he could hang out for a bit and wait for his truck to cool down a bit, so he could get back home, but I had to work on a few things. He comes in, and I offer him a beer since I was going to have one while I worked on painting some cornhole boards for work. I turned on my TV and let him play some music. After I'm working outside for about an hour, I come back inside to find him completely trashed and bawling on my couch. He had finished the rest of the beer in my fridge and helped himself to a bottle of vodka he had found and had almost polished off a brand new bottle. I just froze. I ended up stepping back outside and called my mom to ask for advice. She could hear him wailing and singing at the top of his lungs in the background. I couldn't just send him on his way, as he was way too drunk to drive. So after talking to my mom for a bit, I went inside and told him I had some errands to run and I would drop him off at his place. He asked if he could just hang out at my house while I was gone. I told him hell no, as I actually know this man. So finally I get him to get his shoes on and out of the house, and he said he needs just a minute to say bye to his truck. He then proceeded to talk to his truck for 5 minutes before I could get him in my car. I drive him home with him, insisting on blaring the music as loud as it can go. When we got there, I told him I could stop by before work tomorrow and drive him back to his car. He said okay, but he needs help getting inside. Mind you, this man is like 6 feet 4 inches, and I'm a solid 5 feet 1 inch. So I get out and have to help this man get inside and lay him on his bed. He starts confessing that he is so happy I'm putting up with him, and that most everyone else wouldn't do this for him. I just say okay, and tell him I see him in the morning. It's like 5 o'clock at this point, so I think I'm done with this chaos until morning. I run my errands and get home around 9, and start putting away groceries. I had left my phone on the charger in the living room, and didn't think anything of it. I came back to my phone about 30 minutes later to 10 missed Snapchat calls. I never gave him my real number, and 4 voice messages. I listened to them, and all of them are him screaming at me to give him his truck back now, or he's going to freak out, and that he's walking to my house now to get his shit back. Honestly, it was all very threatening. So I freak out a little, and all of a sudden he's calling again. I pick up, and he immediately starts screaming the same things. I just asked him why he thought I was stealing his truck when I told him I would bring it back in the morning. Well, apparently, he didn't remember that, and then asked for a ride the rest of the way. At this point, I just said yes so I could get this over with and get him out of my life. I called my mom, and had her on the other line the whole time, just in case this guy tried to pull anything crazy. So I get him back to my place, and he asks if he could come grab his wallet that he left there. Again, my dumbass said fine instead of just getting it myself. So he comes in, and then asks if he can just stay cause he's still drunk. I finally lose my shit. I ask him why the hell he started walking to my house in the first place if he couldn't fucking drive, and what his plan was. His response, I was just going to sleep in my truck. I told him to fuck off, and that I was done, and he and his precious truck needed to get off my property now. He finally leaves, but not before asking for another drink, and me screaming at him to get out. I sit down and just start bawling, praying this was all over, and I would never have to deal with him again. Well, I was so wrong. The next morning my work I relay this to my co-workers, and just ask them to let me know if they see him or his truck hanging around. Then my bartender comes up and said there was a call for me. I answer, and lo and behold, it's him. I ask him why the hell he was calling, and apparently he went and got himself arrested the night before. My guess would be drunk driving, and wanted me to bail him out. I told him hell no. I then called the prison themselves and asked to be notified when he is released cause I don't trust that he wouldn't try to contact me or just show up. So they set me up with text notifications, and I go on my way. He got released like 3 days later and did try to text me, but I just ignored them. I didn't want to block him, just in case he did try anything I would have all the messages saved. Luckily, after those few texts, I never heard from him again, and I immediately deleted Tinder off my phone. Story 16. So I meet this girl on a dating app, right? Her name's Emily, and things are going great through texts. We've got some solid banter going, shared a few memes. It's the digital age romance at its finest. I suggest we meet up in person, and she's game. I'm thinking, okay, gotta pick a spot that's fun, casual, and not too loud. My buddy had told me about this new trendy lounge, downtown with good drinks and a cool vibe. Perfect, right? Well, little did I know that this trendy lounge was actually a strip club. Yeah, you heard that right. So the night of the date, I'm feeling pretty confident. I pick her up, and we head to this lounge. Now, as soon as we walk in, I notice something's off. It's dimly lit, which I expected, but the ambience was a little, let's just say, extra. There's a lot of neon, a bit more red lighting than you'd typically find in a cocktail bar, and the music was, how do I put this, aggressively sexy. But hey, maybe this place just has a unique vibe. Who am I to judge? We grab a seat, and I'm about to impress her with my knowledge of cocktails when, out of nowhere, a woman who is wearing significantly less clothing than anyone else in the room appears on a stage in front of us and starts, well, doing her thing. It takes me a moment to process what's happening. Like, my brain is fighting to convince me that this is just some kind of modern art performance. Then it hits me. This is not a trendy lounge. This is a freaking strip club. I glance over at Emily, who is now sitting there with her mouth slightly open in what can only be described as a mixture of shock, horror, and the realization that she's on a date with possibly the dumbest man alive. And what do? Like any sane person in this situation, I blurt out, so I guess I should have checked Yelp reviews, huh? She doesn't even laugh. Not a chuckle. She just stares at me like she's trying to figure out if I'm a moron or a pervert. I'm desperately trying to figure out how to salvage this when the waitress, also scantily clad, because of course she is, comes over and asks if we'd like anything to drink. And because I'm the king of terrible decisions, I order us both drinks. Yep, I decided the best way to handle this situation was to stay and have a drink at the strip club. By this point, I'm in full-blown panic mode, but for some reason I think, maybe if we just sit here and chat like it's a normal bar, everything will be fine. Spoiler, it was not fine. Emily's trying to make small talk, bless her heart, but it's hard to have a conversation when you're actively avoiding eye contact with everything in the room. The dancers, the patrons, the waitstaff, literally everything in my field of vision is a disaster zone. To make matters worse, this guy who clearly spends a lot of time here decides to plop down at our table. He's got a beer in one hand, and with the other, he starts giving me unsolicited advice about how to treat a lady in a place like this. I'm sitting there trying not to cry laugh, while Emily looks like she's mentally writing a Yelp review titled Worst Date Ever. Finally, I decide it's time to throw in the towel. I apologize profusely to Emily and suggest we get out of there and go literally anywhere else. She agrees, probably because she fears for her sanity at this point. We leave, and the car ride is the most awkward silence I've ever experienced. I drop her off at her place, and she gets out of the car so fast I'm surprised she didn't leave a smoke trail behind her. The cherry on top, the next day I get a text from her saying, "You seem nice, but I don't think we're looking for the same thing. Best of luck," which is dating app code for lose my number, you weirdo. And that, my friends, is the story of how I accidentally took a first date to a strip club and ruined any chance I had of a second date. The moral of the story? Always check Yelp reviews before picking a date spot. Story 17. I was in my early 20s and nowadays would have not put up with any of the shit I did, lol. He picked me up from my house. I walked out wearing heels, and he made me go back inside and put on flats because apparently I was taller than him with heels on. Nowadays that is when the date would be over for me, lol, but I did it. We drive to the restaurant. It's a casual spot, kind of like a pub, but with fancier food. We sit down and order our drinks, and there's a table next to us of like 6 guys, all wearing jeans and camo or plaid, hillbilly-looking types. My date starts loudly talking shit about how ugly their clothes are, and the guys keep looking over at us like WTF. I told my date to stop because he was about to get a country boy beat down, lol. The waitress comes to take our order, and he orders for me. And it's something I don't want, so I say oh no thanks and order something else. After the waitress left, he was literally red in the face, fuming, not saying anything, and just staring at me. I awkwardly drank my beer until he said, "Don't you ever do that to me again," and launched into a rant about how I embarrassed him in front of everyone. He was being so loud and everyone was staring at us, and I just wanted to melt into my seat, lol. The food comes and he asks for the check. I offered to pay my half because I did not want to ever see him again, and I didn't want to give him a reason to feel like I owe him something. He goes off on me again about how I need to be trained to be a better woman, how I'm embarrassing him again, just tearing into me. I excuse myself to go to the bathroom, which is across the building and around a corner out of view. I was frantically texting everyone I knew trying to get a ride home and planned on leaving without him seeing. One of the country boys from the table next to us followed me to the bathroom and knocked on the door asking if I was okay. I came out and spoke to him, and he offered to drive me home, so I took it. I get in this guy's old beat-up truck, and he gives me a cigarette and takes me home and makes sure I got into my house before he took off. Lovely guy. 5 minutes later my phone starts blowing up, and it's my date. I guess he started losing his shit when he realized I was gone, and found out I got a ride home from one of the guys he was insulting earlier. Accuses me of being a whore and sleeping with this guy. I blocked his number. He shows up at my house. Now he's banging on the front door so hard I'm afraid it's going to come off its hinges. I lived with 3 male roommates at the time, but none of them were home, so I called the house group chat and begged for one of them to come home. Thankfully my one roommate was just down the road, and he came right home. He's like 6 feet 4 inches, 300 pounds, so he scared my terrifying date away. After that he would randomly show up at our house and bang on the door and try all the windows to see if any of them were unlatched. Looking back, I should have just called the fucking cops. Thankfully he gave up on me after about a month. Probably found a new woman to terrorize. Another story here. Guy from school asked me out to dinner. I agreed. He said he wanted to surprise me with the location, which I initially thought was kind of sweet. He also insisted in picking me up in his car. I was young and didn't have reliable transportation, so I agreed. Once we were a few minutes down the road, he announced the name of the restaurant, and that it was an hour and 15-minute drive away. I said that was kind of far, but he waved me off saying he had a reservation and it would be fine. I realized I was trapped, so I rolled with it, thinking how bad could it be since I knew him from class? My mistake. Cut to me ordering my main course. He interrupted me mid-sentence and proceeded to change my order to something else entirely, insisting I'd like it better. No other reason or rationale. I protested. He refused to listen. I protested again, noting I didn't like some of the ingredients in that dish. He repeated his changed order and directed the server to ignore me as I continued protesting. The server stood there, shifting her eyes back and forth, unsure whose direction to follow. It was turning into an argument, and I felt bad for the server, so I acquiesced. Another big mistake. His selection was horrible. Inedible, really. I didn't finish it. He got mad and told me I was wasting food he was paying for. I responded by offering to pay my half of the bill. He refused, saying gentlemen always pay. Gentlemen also respect women's meal selections, but whatever, dude. Don't say I didn't offer. So he paid and we leave. He suggested we go see some sights in the area, but I tell him I don't feel well and just want to go home. He huffs but agrees. On the long drive back home, he interrupts the silence by asking, "So how many people have you slept with?" Totally out of the blue, no context or introduction. I was completely caught off guard. After a few moments, I managed to coolly reply that was none of his business. His response? "Oh, you must be a slut then." What? Wow. Just wow. Crickets the rest of the ride back. He asked me out for a second date a few days later. I said I didn't think that was a good idea. His response? "That's okay, I wasn't really interested anyway." He then spent the rest of the semester making snarky comments toward me and talking loudly about other girls he was dating whenever I was within earshot. Fun times. Story 18. So we have plans for the date, and then the day of texts me that she's having performance anxiety about it basically, and asking if we can reschedule. I say I get it, no problem, and I think that's it. An hour or so later she texts me to say she changed her mind and wants the date back on. Cool. Except not cool. She got her liquid confidence, and that's why she changed her mind. I show up and she is drunk. I'm already feeling not great, but didn't want her to be this drunk out in public in a city where someone could take advantage. So we get some fries and she asks if I want a beer. Sure. So she gets one too. And I'm like, maybe you don't need to drink more. She says it's fine. Okay. She asks if I want to get out of there, so we pay, and she still has half her beer left. She says we're going to dip out the back, and she's going to bring it. I say, hey, maybe don't do that. She insists it's fine. I say, okay, I'm going to pretend I barely know you if anyone stops us. We make it back to her place, and she leads me through a maze of a building where everything looks exactly the same, and I have no fucking idea how we got to her room. There was nothing really notable to lead me out. This matters later. We get to her room, and she talks about herself and how she produces music, and she wants to show me a song. Cool, I make music too. I'm always down to listen to new stuff. She can't connect her laptop to the Bluetooth thing correctly, but she is so insistent on making sure it connects because she wants me to hear. Okay, so I lie there on her bed making awkward small talk while I wait for her to get it working for like a half hour. Eventually she gets it, shows me the song, it's fine. She puts on other mood music and is lying next to me. Okay, so I forgot to mention I'm trans. That's important here. I'm trans, she's gay. Honestly, never really a problem for me. I'm attractive and do fine. She starts telling me that she kind of hates penises. No offense, but doesn't mind that I have one, asks if she can go down on me. I'm like, not really after that slam dunk of a pickup line, and also definitely not while you're blackout drunk, and I'm just a bit buzzed. She's like, no, it's fine, I don't mind, you're cute, etc., and she starts kissing me along my neck while on top of me. I'm like, and contemplating what to do about this when she just falls asleep. She passed out drunk on top of me. So I'm just lying there messing around on my phone and listening to her music while formulating a plan of what the fuck to do. Eventually I decide to get her off of me, and I try poking her to wake her up and say that I'm gonna leave, but she is dead to the world. I literally can't wake her. So I make sure to leave her on her side so she doesn't throw up and choke herself or anything and make my way out of her room. Right as I'm trying to make my escape, I realize I have no idea where the fuck to go to get out. As I'm panicking, her roommate comes out into the common room and is like, and I'm like, I'm your roommate's date. How do I get out of here? She briefly explains, and I say thanks and tell her to check in on her roommate so she doesn't choke herself in her sleep. I eventually find my way out, no idea how, and I text her that I head home and hope she feels better in the morning. She apologizes profusely the next morning, saying she is so fucking sorry for getting so drunk. I'm pretty understanding, and I'm like, it's okay, I get it. She asks if we can have a do-over, and I don't remember what I said, but it was basically a no without saying it in a mean way. I do feel pretty bad. Maybe we could have been friends or something if she wasn't belligerently drunk on the first date. But yeah, that one's kind of hard to come back from. Story 19. I don't know if this classes as one as wasn't really a date. Was a blind date set up by friends that didn't go well. I'll type it down anyway. When I was 16, my two, now ex-friends, decided to set me up on a date with a guy that one of their male friends knows and works with at a pub. I was nervous, and when we arrived, we got introduced even though I was shy. He was attractive and seemed nice. But this wasn't your typical date. It technically was a blind date as we both never met, yet my friends and her friend decided to set us up. Now, one of my friends is very flirtatious and a bit promiscuous, yet I never realized how crafty she was. The thing is, this guy who I was supposed to go on a date with had his friends there. We went into an open room with a pool table, yet Kay, the flirty one, seemed to catch the guy's attention. I'm speechless that within 10 minutes of being introduced to one another, he has Kay sitting on his lap, my other friend chatting away, and the guy seemingly more interested in her. I stood behind the wall, hidden away from them. I tried to interact but was ignored. Then Kay and my blind date were kissing. I was in tears and had to go to the bathroom to compose myself, while they were all laughing and having a good time. Not one of them seemed to know or care I was missing for the time they spent hanging out with my blind date and his mates. I sat on a chair by myself trying to occupy myself, which very hard, while my friends enjoyed their fun. I stayed as I didn't want to leave my friends, even though I should have left. They spent over 2 hours in the pool table room before they left the room. When they saw me, all that was said was, "Oh, we wondered where you were. We thought you left." I did confront Kay about why she was with my blind date. She said, "He seemed to be more interested in me and thought you're too shy. So it was better that you two didn't really hang. He wasn't your type." I just stayed quiet. I was hurt, and I never really got to know the guy, yet felt he didn't like me anyway. I told my friends to not hook me up again. That was awkward and painful. Should have realized how awful my friends were, but that's a story for another time. Story 20. Very first real date. I was 19, and he was a classmate who'd been hounding me for a date since class started. I knew it was going to go badly within seconds of showing up. We'd agreed that I would drive to his apartment, and he would drive us to a buy-the-slice pizza place, and then see Daredevil. Should have known it would be bad in the planning phase, I know. I arrive half an hour before we have to leave, and he lets me in with a grunted, "Hi," before returning to his computer chair. He has NO things. There is a computer with a desk and chair, and a lawn chair in his otherwise empty apartment. I try to strike up some conversation, but he's at his desk, furiously typing, and has no interest in speaking to me. "What are you playing?" I ask. "Dark Age of Camelot." "So, you want to take off?" I try. He tells me he can't leave early because he needs to meet a friend and sell him a fake sword for fake money. I play MMOs now, but let's put this in perspective. I sigh and sit down in the lawn chair. I keep trying to talk to him, but he's uninterested. The time to leave rolls around. Let's say it's 4 p.m. for clarity's sake, and I get up and tell him it's time to get rolling. He tells me his friend hasn't logged in yet. So he's late. Let's go. You don't play MMOs. You don't understand. I have a reputation in this game. I can't just stand this guy up. He's not there. Let's go. We can push it back another half hour. It's fine. No matter what I say, he won't get up, and he lapses back into typing and ignoring me. For 30, I tell him the time. I am bored and starving. He won't move. Says we'll catch the last showing of Daredevil at 7:30, and that will give us another 2 hours TO wait in his empty apartment. 6:30, he hasn't spoken with me except to grunt when I try and spark conversation. He still refuses to move since his friend hasn't logged in. He suggests we skip dinner and just go to the 7:30 showing. I protest, but he just insists I don't understand how important this is and continues ignoring me. 7:15, it is now time to leave to watch a bad movie while starving. He's rooted in place. I've been here since 3:30. I tell him it's his friend's fault if he doesn't get this sword, and it is time to leave. My date continues protesting. I suggested he call the guy and tell him to log in, so we can leave. He doesn't have his number. Email him. Doesn't have his email. Turns out he has no way to contact him, because not only is this guy not an actual friend, but he doesn't even know his toon name, and was supposed to have met him at noon through a mutual friend, who is also not on. He insists he needs a few more minutes to see if he turns up, or his magic sword selling reputation may never recover. I tell him I'm leaving to go get Taco Bell. He starts placing an order. I clarify that I am taking my horrible food back to my apartment, and he would have to find his own food. Good day, sir.